Okay, welcome back everyone. So I'm getting new experiences navigating the legal bureaucracy of transferring firearms in the United States. So I thought I would continue sharing what I've learned with all of you. I made a few of these videos already. One such was the process of getting and using my Curio and Relics license, or O3 FFL, which came in handy a few times this year already. Well, I recently came into a situation where I wanted to ship a firearm to an out-of-state individual through the Postal Service. Shipping a firearm, especially while navigating all the different state laws, can certainly be intimidating at first, but I wanted to share what that looks like with you since it's not something you can just throw into a box and send to whomever like you would a regular package. So what specifically are we doing? We're shipping a firearm to a non-licensee who lives in a different state than I live in. And there are different laws if you're shipping a firearm to someone in-state versus out-of-state, but I'll briefly go over that near the end of the video. Well, first, federal law requires all modern firearms to be shipped to a holder of a valid federal firearms license, the FFL. Most of the time, the FFL holder is a gun shop or a commercial gun store like Cabela's, just to name a universally well-known retailer of firearms. But most of the time, it's going to be your local mom and pop shop. An individual person can also hold an FFL, but typically it's not that common unless it's a CNR license. So any shipper who does not have an FFL is considered to be an unlicensed person. Unlicensed persons must ship firearms to a licensed FFL dealer only. If the buyer is not licensed, they will need to make arrangements to have that item shipped to a licensed FFL dealer in their state to do the background check and the official transfer. So if I live in Virginia and I'm shipping a firearm to a resident in Oklahoma, I can only send it to an FFL holder in the state of Oklahoma. The FFL will hold onto it until the person I'm transferring it to completes a Form 4473 background check. After that's passed, the firearm will be released to that individual I'm transferring it to, so it's pretty straightforward. But now here's the steps I went through as I kind of experienced this for the first time. So first, you want to make sure that the gun you're selling or transferring fits within the parameters of a modern firearm. If it's a firearm manufactured before 1898, it's considered an antique, and antiques are not regulated the same as modern firearms. You can ship those in the mail directly to the person receiving it without having to go through the FFL process. You can look at the actual definition of an antique, but it generally fits most guns made before 1898. Antiques are not regulated by the federal government. They're not considered modern firearms. Is it a Curio and Relics firearm? I'm simplifying this a little bit, but a firearm that falls within the category of Curio and Relic is generally a firearm that is 50 years or older. Well, in this case, I am transferring a gun that falls under the category of Curio and Relic. I do have a Curio and Relics FFL. So does that change anything here? No, it does not. Since I'm transferring the firearm to someone out of state who does not have any type of FFL, then it doesn't matter. Remember, out-of-state transfers can only happen if it's being shipped directly to a licensed person. If they did have a CNR license, then that would sort of change this whole situation. But because I really could just send it to them directly to their place of residence without having to go through a Form 4473. There are regulations involved, but it just makes the transfer of guns that are 50 years or older much easier between two licensed individuals. Also, remember that you have to be in accordance with federal and state law. So I couldn't send a non-California compliant AR-15 to California or a non-SAFE Act compliant weapon to New York State. So what do you do now? Before you ship a gun, the buyer must fax or email you a copy of the recipient FFL license. Legally, you can only ship the gun to the address on the license. So when preparing the label, put the address of the FFL on it and then the name of the person you're sending the firearm to so the gun shop employee can identify who it's being transferred to. If you just put the name of the person who holds the FFL, like at your mom and pop gun shop, in that case it would be the owner of the shop, they're going to get in their name, they're going to open it up, and they're going to be like, I have no idea who this is going to. So make sure you put the name of the person that you're actually sending it to, but you want to make sure it's the address of the FFL license holder. This kind of goes without saying, but make sure you properly pack your firearm. You should be packing it in a box with rigid walls, in bubble wrap. It should be tightly packed in there so nothing's rattling around. I've received firearms before in the mail that were poorly wrapped, had no bubble wrap, maybe some paper. Don't be that guy. Make sure if you're sending it that it's, nicely wrapped. Things are not rattling around. One thing is you want to prevent thieves and also prevent anything from coming free or being damaged. I've received guns that I've had the bolt puncture the box wall, and you just don't want that situation because stuff might fall out. You also want to ensure that the exterior of the box gives no obvious indication of the firearm within, or that it contains a firearm. This prevents tampering by curious postal employees. Also, no ammo is allowed to be packed with the gun. That must be sent separately if you intend them to be together in the same order. It's just the way it is. I also took some pictures of the gun before shipping it and sent the buyer a few of these just in case anything is damaged, and I can use it as proof in case something happens to the stock in transit. I can use that as part of the insurance claim. You just don't want something that's an expensive firearm to come to the other person damaged, and then suddenly you have no proof that it was not damaged before you sent it. So that's just kind of a safety measure. I also bubble wrap the bolt separately just so it's not bouncing around again. Just make sure it's all tight in there. Final part of sort of this packing process is I put a copy of the FFL I'm shipping to in the box and a copy of the driver's license. It's just an extra layer of comfort for the FFL when they receive it, even though it's not legally required. Just to prove your identity. In this case, I'll put a copy of my CNR license in there again. You don't need to do that, but it kind of shows some legitimacy when it comes to the gun shop, especially if you're a non-licensed person and you don't have any sort of 03 FFL or Curion Relics FFL. At least put your driver's license, maybe a note, possibly a bill of sale, just to make it look a little bit more legitimate. Maybe your shop doesn't care about that. But carriers are also allowed to inspect the contents of the box, from what I understand, so I would at least have those items in there. Now, at this point, you have to pick your carrier. Different shippers have different guidelines, so you'll want to make sure you know what you're doing and you understand their rules. For example, USPS, United States Postal Service, only ships rifles and shotguns, while you have to use FedEx and UPS to ship handguns. And they typically require handguns to be overnight shipped. And weirdly enough, FedEx won't allow non-licensed persons to ship firearms at all, so that's not even an option. So for my experience, I went with USPS since it's a long rifle that I was sending out, and they have fairly competitive rates. So I went in, had the label prepared already, and they just weighed it. I paid for the express shipping, marked it for signature required on arrival, purchased some insurance on the total just in case there was damage, and then they took it off and threw it in the back with the rest of the stuff. And they really threw it. It's USPS. They're handling a lot of merchandise that's coming through. They're handling a lot of items, so they don't have time to, be fragile with your item. But that's why you pack it properly. And that was it. They'll give you a tracking number, of course, and I was out of the post office in 7 minutes. Now, you do not need to disclose the contents of the box. Just don't mark it with anything that indicates that it's a firearm. In fact, they tell you not to do that. Just be familiar with USPS's policies on shipping long arms, or else, you could get a knock on the door by police authorities. You don't want that happening. So, signature required, has to only be sent to the address of the FFL, and it has to be sent via express. Now, what if you run into a situation where they ask, where a curious postal employee asks what is inside? You walk in with this giant long box. Now, I don't think they will, at least in my experience when I went there. But of course, don't lie to them if they do. I'm sure most post office employees know little to nothing about firearm laws or their own internal shipping policies. So maybe be prepared to explain how it works to them, or honestly request the manager. If they still refuse to handle it, it's up to you. You can either try a different carrier like UPS. You can, try to bring it to larger attention of the store manager, like I said, or I'm sure there's some process. I before just doing some research on this specific point, there was a lot of people who had personal experiences where they went into a post office. People knew they had a gun in the box and freaked out. So again, I hope you don't have that experience. I live in an area that is probably more urbanized, definitely a higher population density, but I had no problems. You walk in with a box, it could be anything from furniture to who knows what. So anyway, hopefully that doesn't happen to you, but my experience was you walk in there, you paid for the label, made sure you're following all the rules and requirements, and you walk out. That's pretty much it. I also forgot to mention to make sure the firearm is not loaded. I think this is pretty common sense, but the carrier may request that you open the package to ensure the weapon is unloaded, if they know that's a firearm, and that this falls within the shipper's guidelines. You don't want anyone getting hurt, and again, you don't want the authorities knocking on your door because you forgot to unload a firearm before you shipped it. And certainly the gun shop that you sent it to will not be happy about that. So one last point about the process, but you have to drop it off in person. You cannot use drop boxes or third-party shipping centers, for example. I can't go to my local USPS drop box in my neighborhood and leave the gun out there for someone to pick up. Again, I shouldn't need to say this, but here we are. I'm sure they made that rule because somebody did that. But something you have to go into a USPS post office and process there. Well, that was pretty much the entire process of shipping a firearm out of state to a non-licensee. It's not that hard, and it's a lot less intimidating after you've done it once. Again, I'm not providing legal advice to anyone. I'm simply showing you my experience so that others can see how it was done. You also want to make sure that you understand the law, different carriers and their policies, and that you've done your research properly. I would also love to hear your experiences, since I'm sure there's a wide array of them across the country, as I've read online. So again, I want to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.